want to be like very reductionist about how you set culture inside of a company, it's what do you reward, what do you tolerate, and what do you not tolerate? And so to use this as an example, like inaction, we wouldn't tolerate. At bats, we're like, hey, that's good. And then what we reward is like actual successful attempts. Hey, I'm Wade. I'm one of the co-founders, CEO at Zapier. Zapier is the most connected AI orchestration platform. And I'm looking forward to chatting with y'all about how you can transform your organization to take advantage of AI.
Okay, Wade, we've been really stoked to talk to you. Really stoked. What are you seeing are the common obstacles that other organizations who are maybe earlier in their adoption curve than you are, what are you seeing are some of the challenges that folks are facing? And I'm really curious about particularly non-technical organizations, service organizations, because I think a lot of people read this stuff and they go, well, of course, Wade can do that as Zapier. I mean, they're a tech company, right? Think about, like, we were talking about fishing before we hit record. You're putting lines in the water.
Yeah.
What are you seeing from others in the water?
I think there's a couple things that we're noticing. First and foremost, most of the refrain around AI is the hype. It's when is AGI going to get here? AI is replacing jobs. If you don't get into AI, like your job might be at risk. Like there's that noise. The volume is like turned up to 11 there. Then the like actual how-to specific stuff is a lot harder to find. And it's the sort of refrain is like, well, just get in there, try the tools, figure it out yourself, etc. And I can appreciate that because I kind of like to dabble and experiment with these tools myself. But I know a lot of folks in my life that just, they need a little tips. They need some inspiration. They need some guidance. And it feels like, with AI in particular, we're in such the early innings where there isn't like courses on this stuff. There isn't training manuals. There isn't a book to go read. You can talk to the prompts and you can talk to the AIs themselves and they'll often coach you on some of this stuff.
Sure.
But a lot of how I've gotten better at this stuff is just watching other people use it and going like, oh, what'd you do there? Like, how did that work? Why'd you do it that way? And then trying it myself. And, so I think the big gap for a lot of folks is just simply like, what do I use it for? I've tried ChatGPT and like, I know that it can come up with a good poem and I know it can help me summarize an email, but like, I'm having a hard time like taking it to the next level, particularly for those non-technical folks. Like code generation for engineers is like, those folks, like they really got it dialed in for the most part.
Right.
But for the rest of us, there is a little bit of like, well, what is the use case for me?
What do you tell like your family, for example, non-technical friends or even companies? What are the, one or two go-to try this kinds of interactions you recommend?
Well, I'll tell you like one of my favorite use cases that I have is I have a really long running chat with ChatGPT now where I basically took all of my like health data. So, workouts, stuff I eat, sleep patterns, blood tests, like all this sort of stuff. I'm not a tracker, mind you. Like I don't like track this stuff religiously. But the way I'm describing you might think, oh, Wade's like one of those nerds who like obsesses all this stuff. Not really. Like
I was
I just
thinking
kind
that.
of,
You read my mind.
yeah, I'm not really like, I just have this data because like, it just kind of, the app that I use for workouts, like kind of keeps track of it. And like you get a blood test. So it's like, okay, you got this stuff. So I just uploaded it all to ChatGPT and I said, hey, given what you know about me, like, tell me like in specific details, tell me how I could improve my overall health and wellness. And boom, it just like spits out like a whole like recipe of things to go try. And, about every 3 months or so now, I'll just come back to that chat. I'll refresh it with all the fresh data and say like, okay, run it again. Tell me what to do.
What is a concrete thing that it suggested to you that you didn't kind of...
Well, so like I didn't have, I've not been like a big like supplements or vitamins person or anything like that. I just kind of, I have a basic workout routine and, I mostly have, I don't really diet, but I kind of have like restricted a few things. I always slept really well. So like those things were covered, but it was like, hey, you probably ought to be taking some vitamin D. You probably ought to be taking some fish oil. You probably ought to take some creatine. You probably ought to do this. And I started doing it and it's like, oh, well, kind kind of helps on some
Did
things.
did the impact show up in your blood work or in how you feel? If you close the loop on the experiment, so to speak, do you feel like ChatGPT's recommendations were validated in your
Well,
experience?
the creatine one is interesting because like that one, I felt like I could tell right away because literally I do weightlifting is what I do. And like, I literally, I'm like, oh, I can actually pick up heavier stuff now. And so it's
Hmm.
like, all right,
Hmm.
like, I guess that seems to have worked. Now, like I said, I'm not
Yeah.
crazy scientific about this stuff. There's the like, who's the guy right now, Brian Johnson, who's like, he's like tracking everything. Like, I'm intrigued by that, but I am not even close to that. Like, it's just so far and away. How do
Okay, but
you?
so yeah, I think Henrik and I are going to the same place, which is like you start with a health coach. Nick Thompson, who's a big time runner, CEO of The Atlantic, he told us recently about his routine of uploading his, Strava data into ChatGPT, for example. How do you go from something like that? So say you're a family member or, a new business contact tries that to a business application. How do you start to close the gap between those two things?
Well, so I think you start to do it for something like this, and you get like such a better experience than you would, yeah, going to see your doctor or going to talk to like a generic health coach, and you start to go, huh, I wonder what else I could try this for. And so at work, like, we have built a strategy GPT. And so this is when anyone comes to us like a one pager or, three pager on like, hey, here's a proposal for an area or an opportunity to go tackle. There's always like stuff that people just are not thinking of, both in terms of like actually through the strategy, but then also just like in how the readers are going to interpret it, like common questions, things like that. So we just built a GPT that's like, you feed it into it and it has like common recommendations. It's like, hey, you're probably missing X, Y, and Z. Like, you didn't present any options or you didn't actually propose a direction to go in. You're sort of just saying, hey, here's some information. You're missing this, that, or the other. And so it helps people just come a lot more prepared for strategy discussions. So now all these examples, by the way, are like back and forth chats, which I think is like a really good, that's where most people start. The big leap, the big next leap is how do you actually turn this into structured automation? And so I'll give you an example of where this is really powerful, which is something like lead generation. If you want to do research on a company, you might say, hey, I'm going to meet with, I'm meeting with Wade from Zapier today. So you might have a chat that's going back and forth with me to sort of like do hands-on research about this. But the kicker is, you're having to do that yourself every single time. Now, what if you're actually trying to record, I don't know, multiple podcasts every single day? That's a lot of research. What gets more interesting is when you can say, hey, I actually run the same system on every podcast guest every single time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to upload Wade's contact information, and then that's going to fire off an automation that's going to run through the same set of prompts. It's going to gather the same set of contacts, and it's going to generate a report that now, when I wake up in the morning, I just have a prompt on Wade. I have an output on the three other guests I'm going to have, and I can just read through this stuff.
As a concrete example, we do that with inbound. We get quite a few inbound folks who wants to be on the podcast, and it used to take Emma, our producer, quite a lot of time to research all of them.
Totally.
And so she went about building an optimization that did the same thing, try to find some other podcast this person's been on, try to look at that, figure out what have worked well for us before, and then come with a recommendation. But the question I had two questions that I guess like I think are very difficult to answer, but which I've been very excited to talk to you about. The first is this kind of like self-prompt of like, what is the best thing one can do to constantly get reminded that this is probably something that I should go and make a SAP for, or like whatever optimization system they use?
I think for these ongoing automations, you mostly are just trying to pay attention during your day to the common tasks you find yourself doing, whether it's you individually or the organization as a whole is constantly doing. And then those are the places where you ought to say, I'm like, if you look at someone like me, like I do a bunch of interviewing. Like I'm interviewing candidates for jobs, like, probably, I don't know, 5-10 times a week, something like that. And every time, like I'm running through the same steps, running through the same process just to get prepared for those things. And so that's an example of where, oh man, I should just automate the research process on this stuff. And I shouldn't be having to go through the same, 30-minute research steps every single time. I should have an automation for that. So you can often look at your calendar, you can look at your common task and say, hey, where are the places in here that I ought to be automating? So that's an easy way to start. The second place then is, and this is I find is trickier, folks, but is to think through the places that you ought to be doing something, but you aren't because you actually don't have the capacity, the bandwidth to go do this stuff. So again, I'll kind of stay on this researching people use case, which is one of the common things I have to do is I'm often just meeting with customers, prospects, etc. And in the past, you know, I'd go to an event and, there's 100 people at the event. And I'm like, hey, which one of these people should I go spend time with? Are there any people in here that could be, good sales candidates or, partnerships prospects or heck, recruiting prospects? There's a whole just like question around that stuff. And I have to make a judgment call. Like, do I go talk to an AE or someone in the sales org and say, hey, could you do research on these 100 folks for me? Or do I go do it myself? And the answer is like, if I ask an AE, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to either do a shoddy job of it because they're like, I got other stuff to do. I got like real leads with real quota that are way better to go get after. So I'm just going to get it done because Wade asked me to. That's like, I'm like, that's not exactly a thing. The second thing that might happen is they might go, well, Wade asked me, I'm going to do this really, really good. So they're going to go spend a ton of time on this, way more than I actually really need. And that's going to take away from them actually closing quota, closing deals. So that's like a weird request. Then I'm like, well, I could do it myself, but I'm busy. So I'm probably going to just do the shoddy job that the AE did. And the reality is most of the time I would just be like, I'll just wing it. I'm just going cold
Whatever.
and see what I could have.
Yeah.
But very concrete on that one. How do you then, because one of the things that I think that highlight is you then have to decode what is actually an interesting person for you, right? And that might be different from you and me, but also might be different from you from, fundraising, recruiting, wanting to get the message out, want to reposition Zapier, whatever kind of like it is. So what do you then do to figure out like what is the prompt in the process that allow the AI algorithm to kind of pick up what you are actually looking for? If we stay with that concrete example, right? You're going to a conference. Let's say you go to Masters of Scale in October, and like you're going to talk, so you're going to be in the green room, and so you have a high-end. There's a lot of people there that you might want to meet, but there's probably 35, 40, 50 people who are talking, or speaking. What's the process?
So, okay, this is where it does take a little bit of effort to figure these things out. So first and foremost, like we know what our ideal customer profile looks like. So we figured out, hey, based on historical information, these types of people and these types of companies and these types of roles tend to get the most value out of Zapier. So generally, I'm going to want to talk to people that look like them. And so we have prompts that outline, hey, are in marketing and this type of company and this type of role with this many employees, at this, so it's a whole bunch of stuff that we've, outlined and said, hey, this is closer to what we're looking for. So that's in a prompt. And so you can basically then, take an email address or take a name and say, hey, go enrich this, pull this whole bunch out, and then go match it against these examples and then score it. How good of a match is this or bad of a match is this for what we're trying to look for? And so say there's 100 people at the event, you could do that for every 100 folks, get a score out of it, sort it by the score, and then you could start to see, oh, okay, here's the 10 people that I probably want to try and spend disproportionate amount of time with. And here's the bottom 10 that I can probably safely ignore. And it sort of just helps you like figure out how to spend your time. But it takes, for us, it was like we had to understand who's the ideal customer profile. And then we had to take the time to like write that down in specific enough language so that, when you feed in an email address or a name or, a LinkedIn profile or you name it, it can go enrich that lead and then figure out how to compare and contrast.
Yeah, what you're getting at is the power of examples as well. Like to me, when you say your two criteria are either look at your calendar to see where you're doing repetitive tasks that could be automated, or two, where should you be but aren't. I think imagining where you should be doing stuff is more difficult to imagine for a lot of people. And so that's where something like a community of practice is helpful, where you're hearing examples, where you see it, and you go, oh, we could do something like that. And it made me kind of wonder, if we shift gears for a second to talk about the Zapier adoption journey, were there internal uses that really kind of sparked momentum? And the reason I ask this is because we had Shir Yeshua, who's the head of AI at Notion, on recently, and she told us about how they were tracking internal adoption metrics and they weren't really getting liftoff. And then one of the engineers on her team posted a 2-minute loom of preparing for a performance review. And she said after that loom posted, they all of a sudden, it was like it was like it hit an asymptote. Internal usage just skyrocketed, which to me speaks to the value. There's also a danger, but the value of kind of discrete use cases. Can you think of a couple of examples like that in the Zapier adoption journey that helped Zapians just kind of go, oh, I can do that?
It's funny you mentioned performance reviews. Like that was one for us. I think it's because everybody has to do it. Nobody
Hmm.
likes it. And
Huh.
it's just the type of thing that people are like, how can I make this better? Like nobody thinks that performance review process is like a good one. So that's one that's like created like widespread adoption. There's two other examples I can think of that have catalyzed people's ambition. Because performance reviews that's like a helper, like it's useful, but it doesn't
Yeah.
actually really change the trajectory of your company all that much. The two that I can think of that have really changed the ambition of what is possible is one is our voice of customer program. So, like many companies, like we're trying to take in signal from what we're hearing in sales and support and on social and all the channels that we have. We're trying to pull those all into like a repository. And then we're trying to like have a bunch of metadata associated with that. So, is this a enterprise customer? Is this a small business customer? Is this a free customer? All that sort of stuff to help us slice and dice these things. And then we're trying to extract all these themes from it. These types of customers love the product. These types of customers seem to hate it. These types of features, people are craving and we're not supporting very well. This parts of the platform kind of suck. So we have, a voice of customer program that does that. Pre this solution I'm about to talk to you about, this was like a labor of love. It's just like, manually trying to get stuff into certain areas. It's people like reading through copious notes, trying to suss out themes. Um, and the quality of it, like you're always unsure of like how good is the quality of it. And the speed at which you can actually synthesize all this stuff is like pretty slow. So you don't actually use it as much as you would like. Um, Fast forward, we had one woman who said, you know what? I can do this a lot better. And effectively, what she'd done was she set up a database where she has a bunch of automations powered by Zapier that are pulling in Gone transcripts into this database. They're pulling in Zendesk tickets all into this database. They're pulling in all the social mentions into this database. They're pulling in all the users' research calls all into this database. So it's all just getting sucked into one area, just pulling in context, pulling in context, pulling in context. Then she does a couple things with it. One, she has her own system where she will generate reports every month that synthesizes this for every team inside the company. So pricing and packaging, here's everything we've heard on pricing in the last month. And here's the common complaints. Here's the common, things that people like. The core product, here's what people are asking for. Da, da, da. So she does her own version of that, which is great because it's like every month, like clockwork, we're getting thematic results on what these things look like. And we can track up and down, like what are the trends on that. So that's thing one that's really awesome. The thing two is she's also built chatbots and query tools on top of these that now all of our product managers, our designers, our PMMs have access to this stuff. So on demand, when they're asking a question about like, hey, I wonder, I noticed this customer had this problem. I wonder how much that comes up for us. They can go in and
Sure.
query and say like, hey, how often does this happen? And
Yeah.
sometimes you might find like, oh, that's an edge case. Like, that definitely stinks for that person, but like, I don't know if we want to like drop everything and go solve this. Other times you'll go like, holy cow, like this is like pervasive across the customer base. Like we really need to figure out how to do it. And then the second thing that's really powerful about that is when they're doing that stuff on demand, they can now track down, here are 10 customers specifically who have talked about this problem. And so they can go reach out to them and say, hey, I'm working on this. Can you give us some feedback on like this implementation of this thing? And so, it's really been able to just provide like a level of detail and context and analysis and follow up. Like there's just so many areas of this part of the business that are just way, way more effective than they were at the
Yeah.
past because someone took the time to just suck all this context into one place and build a couple tools on top of it that made it a lot more actionable at the end of the day. So that's example one. The second example is we have a customer brief generator. This is similar to the research use cases we were talking about before. This one is just a simple form, and you come in and you enter a domain, and that domain then goes and hits a couple things. It hits a web search, deep research, and it pulls out a whole bunch of information just generically. Like, tell me about this company. Tell me about like what are the things they're doing, etc. Second thing it does is hits a Glean search internally. So we use Glean for like company stuff, and it goes and pulls out everything internal discussion that we've had around this company internally. So are they a customer? Are they not a customer? Are they, in a renewal process? Are we trying to close them? Like, you get sort of a whole bunch of rich thematic information around that. It goes and hits that voice of customer tool. So it extracts all the information out of there. So, support queries, sales requests, categorized by date. Like, are there common issues that they're hitting? It pulls in like the account team that's associated with this. So I know the AE, the sales rep, the support team that are dedicated to working on this. So if I have follow-up requests on them, I know what to do. And the last thing it does is it pulls in usage stats. So what are they using us for? Are they, doing stuff with Jira and Slack? Are they doing stuff with MailChimp or Salesforce? Are they doing, AI related use cases, non-AI related use cases? And so if I'm going to go meet somebody, I often will just like, put their domain in, and now I can show up and be ready to talk to them in a way that is I'm just a lot more prepared than I was in the past. In the past, I
Incredible.
show up and be like, I bet you're using Zapier, and I bet you're using it for this, that, and the other. And just because I've been
Right.
working on the business for so long, I kind of intuitively could guess mostly. But most of our employees can't do that. Most of our employees haven't worked, 14 years on the business. And so having a tool like that is really helpful. And even for me, instead of just guessing, like I actually know now. I can say like, hey, I think you're doing this, that, and the other. I think you have an opportunity to do these 4 other things that are related.
It makes you and your teammates superheroes, really.
It
That's
totally
how I hear
does.
it. It's like
Yeah,
you show up to a call and it's like this person's like, have they read my email? Do they know me? I mean, so to me, that is a great example of exceptional AI use. I'd
hmm
love to talk about your adoption metrics for a second, because the big figure you
yep,
put out in the world is 89%. And just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm hugely skeptical of potentially, self-serving metrics. I remember Henrik and I were on a global kind of meeting with a professional services organization. And this person said, I kid you not, for the first time in my 40-year career, I'm seeing 100% adoption across the enterprise. This is, very, very large enterprise. I had happened recently to have conducted a multi-week training with several hundred of this person's employees, and I would not categorize them as,
at 100%.
you know, even a fraction of that.
Yeah,
But to
yeah,
me, it speaks to there's a little bit of a moral hazard in
sure.
reporting metrics like that. So how do you think about when you say 89% adoption? How do you think about, call it, quantity use versus quality use? And what does it take for you to be able to boast an adoption rate
Yeah.
if you had to defend that metric?
Yeah. So, we look at usage across a bunch of different tools. So, we've got our engineers using Cursor. We have our own employees using Zapier and the AI capabilities within Zapier. We have ChatGPT licenses for most people inside the company. And then we run internal surveys where we say, hey, like, tell us what your most impactful AI use cases are. How often are you using it? Things like that. And so, through like those, I guess, tools, we're able to get a sense of how much AI adoption is happening and what is the level of depth that it is happening at. And so when I boast an 89% metric, like I'm pretty confident that we've got like 89% of our folks using it with some amount of regularity. Now, to your point, the depth of that usage varies. There are definitely folks who are inside a tool like Cursor every minute of every single day. Like that they are living and inhaling and breathing this stuff. And then you've got folks who are like, using ChatGPT daily, but it's like, a couple times a day, I'm going to it for various tasks. So that's kind of what it ends up looking like at the individual level. Then you pop it up. And this is where I think a lot of the power is. You got a lot of people benefiting from AI that other folks have built. So like the voice of customer tool is a great example of one individual who has built a tool that now can empower inside of the entire organization. Now, are the users of that tool using AI? Yeah, I guess. Are they
Kind
like,
of. Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
are they're definitely the benefactors of this like work that this other individual has done. But are they using AI? Are they not using AI? I don't know. You be the judge. All right. So like there's stuff like that, but those are transformative use cases nonetheless.
For sure.
One thing that I am so curious about how you think about is what I think normally about like the atomization of flows. And
Mhm.
so I think because I've been a Zapier user forever and other tools, it's very easy for me to look at a problem and say, hey, this is actually how I'll kind of like basically cut it into slices. And this is how
Yep.
I'll have different Zapier or SAP kind of doing different things, right? So my brain almost like works like that. I think for a lot of people, when they have a problem, they go like, oh, I need a new head count to do this. And because the way that they kind of like
Yeah.
objectify how to solve the problem is they get another human to do it. It seems to me that it's a bit of a skill to atomize stuff. And you've done this and obviously invented the whole system that does this. How do you explain to people who are new to, let's just do Zapier, because I think that's like such a good architecture for even thinking about how you make automate workflows or kind of like bots. How do you normally explain to people how that thought process go?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're spot on. Like the best users of AI that I watch are really good at breaking things down step by step. And yeah, there's this new trendy term, context engineering. Like they're basically going bit by bit and saying, gather this piece of data from here, gather this piece of data from here, feed it to this prompt, and then feed it to the next prompt, and then feed it to the next one. And they're chaining all these things along. So spot on that, like that is where I think you see the like most impressive results. And most people don't intuitively do that. Um, you know, the way in which I often try and explain it is to use examples, is to like just step back and show how this can actually work. And the one tool that I like to use is Zapier agents. So Zapier agents, the thing I like about it is when you go to prompt it for something you want to build, it will rewrite your prompt for you and show it to you. So the example I like to do is, hey, can you I'd like you to reply to my email. And so, most people, when they say like, oh, great, I can have an AI like reply to my email, they'll come in and say like, reply to my email. Like they don't sort of think through like, okay, if it's a recruiting email, I want you to reply this way. If it's a sales email, I want you to reply this way. If it's that, and just like, start breaking it down bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. So when you prompt the Zapier agent, it actually rewrites your prompt and it sets it up into like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. And so you start to read it and it sounds pretty human. You start to go, oh, interesting. Like it took that and turned it into this. And then when you read through what it turned it into, you start to realize, well, on step 3, like that's not quite actually what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something more like this. And so it starts to train your brain to realize like, oh, I need to like guide it in this way. And before I was just giving it this like very generic step, but because it rewrote it for me, I realized, I need to add steps 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we'll often see that as folks learn this skill, it turns into like their Zap titles will start to be like version 27, version 93, et cetera. So they
Yeah.
start to like
Yeah.
realize like, oh, wow, there's a whole optimization process that can happen here to really make this system like work really great for me, versus just like reply to my email.
Okay, we got to talk Code Red for a minute because
Yep.
clearly that I think is a seminal moment in your history and in the organization kind of as an inflection point. But I think it's also it's really great branding because I think a lot of organizations they hear Code Red, they see how you describe it, and they go, "We need to do that," or even maybe more pointedly, "Do we need to do that?" Could you talk for a second about how you assessed as a CEO when it was time to call Code Red
Yeah.
and how you advise other leaders to know when the right time to declare a code red is?
Yeah. We've only done a code red once. And so it was in this moment. And it was right after the GPT-4 launch. So the reason we did it then was we were my co-founders were messing around with GPT. I guess it would have been 3 before ChatGPT had launched. And so folks in the organization knew that like, hey, we were curious about this stuff. We were interested. But I think at the time, it felt more like, oh, that's a weird founder thing. Like they're off kind of like just exploring, like doing what they do, right? But no one like, it wasn't like a serious discussion internally. ChatGPT comes out, that starts to change a little bit. We're like, hey, whoa, this stuff is pretty cool. Like it has more widespread applicability than maybe we thought. So people are getting like more excited about this stuff. You're starting to see like a handful of individuals and teams like start to think through like, could we build a feature around this? Could we automate this process or the other? But I'd say still, 90+% of the org is like, laser focused on my roadmap, my goals, my, short-term things that I got to go hit. We have an offsite in February of, I guess it's 2024, where, we get on stage. We put some customers on stage that are doing cool stuff with AI. We're doing more things this way. And so more of the organization starts to like get interested and curious about this. But we're still like pretty organic about our push to go adopt this stuff. We're just more like, hey, this is a trend. We should be paying attention, da da da.
And by organic, you just mean it's you're encouraging bottom up experimentation.
Yeah, it's very
but there's
suggestive.
nothing top down. Okay, yeah.
There's no mandates. There's no goals. Like nobody's getting hired or fired because of this stuff. Not really. Like, but it's it's like subtle encouragement and pressure to like go experiment, try these things. GPT-4 comes out, I think March of that year though, and that was like a wake up call because the improvement between 3.5 and 4 was enormous. And the release cycle between 3.5 and 4 was really short. And so we just looked at that and said, if we're going to have releases happening every 6 months and the improvement rate is going to be that, then how we're thinking about our roadmap, how we're thinking about our operations, like we're just totally miscalibrated on a lot of areas. And so we didn't have like all of the answers. We just knew a lot of stuff's got to change. And I remember a late night call with my co-founder saying like, hey, we got to do something different. Like we got to chart a new course on this stuff because this is going to be this is the thing for the next decade. And so we called it Code Red. I don't think it was particularly popular at the moment. There was definitely folks in the organization who were like alarmist and, sensational and like comments like that came up. But, I think we did some things right. One, we ran an all hands hackathon. So we said, hey, everybody stop what you're doing. We'll put out a couple Loom training videos on like how to use the OpenAI APIs, how to use various tools. And we just gave people a week to just go put their hands on the technology, stop what they were doing, and just build some familiarity with it to make it less of this like fearful, scary thing and more of a like, oh, here's some awesome stuff it does. Here's some weird things it does. At the time, like hallucinations were like really rampant inside these tools. And so folks are like, you could have some fun over like, oh, it's like, clearly it's not going to take my job yet because it can't do this, that, or the other. So that like familiarity with it made it a lot less scary and it made it a lot more just like, oh, here's another awesome tool in our toolbox. Now, granted, it's different because of its widespread applicability. And then we just kind of rinse, wash, and repeated that. Like every, 6 months, we do a hackathon. We try and do show and tells at all hands. And that like cadence, I think just got every single time we do that, we just see more use cases, more ambition going up, more folks sort of like jumping on the bandwagon. And so what started off as like the founders are kind of off there, like doing oddball stuff. Like it totally inverted now where it's like, if you're not using AI, like people are kind of like, wait, what? Like, why? Like,
so from 0 to 10, if 0 is like not using AI at all, and 10 is like the most use of AI that you can imagine your organization could ever be capable, where do you think you are on the journey right now?
I mean, probably like a 2. And I think we're doing better than most.
I think if you talk to Moderna, which do very well, which do Logitech, that do very well, Bark, which I think it does very well, I think most founders of those organizations are with you. We feel that we're at 2, right? And everybody else is like impressed, like we are with you. Like this is like really incredible what you're doing. Why do you think it is? Is it just because humans, take some time to change, or what do you think is like the underlying thing that makes it complicated for people to adapt this? This is back to people who were printing out their emails in the early days of the internet? Or what do you think is the root cause of this?
I think it's a lot easier to ship the tech than it is to change organizations. And this is one area where I have some envy for the companies that have started after ChatGPT, is that they got to just start with a clean slate.
From the ground up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like you often talk to founders there and they're like, Claude is writing, 90+% of my code.
Yeah.
You're like, dang, that's incredible. Whereas, we got a 14-year code base that like is not easily worked in by AI yet. Now we're working to change a lot of that stuff, but that's not something we can just snap our fingers and have happen. So I think there's this whole just like we got, these organizations that are older than ChatGPT have a whole bunch of stuff that have to get reinvented and rebuilt, and that just takes time and effort to work your way through. And there's creativity involved. Like it's not always obvious. Like, hey, if we shed this entire department and recalibrate it and retune it into this way, will that actually work? Like it might, but it's not a certainty. And so to like take that leap, like that takes some conviction to get there. And so I think it just takes a lot of time to like really get to, like a 10. I don't know. I don't know of any organization that's at a 10.
What I'm hearing too, a big part of this is change management, right? I mean,
totally.
Part of, I think the reason you're a 2 out of 10 is because of you mentioned earlier, the depth of adoption varies greatly, right? You also mentioned that when you declared the code red, not everybody was happy about it. I'd love to talk for a second about how you think about organizations managing, you mentioned in your memo, for example, I was just looking at it last night. Yeah, I'm reading verbatim here. Set a Q2 personal growth goal to use AI or ChatGPT in at least one area of your daily work. If you're not sure how, talk with your manager. And if your manager isn't sure, they should talk with their manager and so on until the answer becomes clear. So I love that. And I totally agree. Find one way to use AI daily. Here's my question for you. How much patience do you give a human who needs to change before you say, you know what? I think the phrase Sam Altman has used is not going to make it. There's some people who go, they're not going to make it. Like they're not going to make the transition. How much kind of encouragement, incentive, motivation do you provide before you say, you know what? We actually need to hire a different kind of individual.
Yeah. Well, I think for us, the answer has empirically been about 2 years. Like we called the co-year 2 years ago. And where I'm at today is I can kind of tell. If I talk to somebody and I can see like, hey, resistance is like the biggest thing. Like resistance, I'm like not going to make it. That it's like, hey, we just can't work with that. Like that's not going to be acceptable. Now, people who are curious and want to do successful, but maybe just haven't found the right use case or working in a part of the company that like doesn't lend itself well to these tools yet, and they're just kind of banging their head against the wall still, that I'm like tolerant of. I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll work our way through this. Like, let's go. This is not, these things are, as impressive as they are, they still are just tools at this moment in time. And so there is kind of like a line there between like resistance versus like interest, but struggling. And it's like, as long as you're willing to learn and put the effort in and try, like we're still willing to have you on the boat here at Zapier, so to speak.
I don't know if you agree with this. I think at bats is a great metric. It's actually not like what your batting average is right now. But if you show up to a performance review in 6 months and you say, I haven't tried anything, that's a problem.
100%.
If you say, here's the 20 things I've tried and they've all failed, I go, great. What's the next 20, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right way.
I actually like that framing. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think in a lot of organizations, the problem is inaction is permissible.
Yes.
And to say I haven't done anything is perfectly acceptable. So you actually have to change the frame, but that is a really painful thing. I don't know if you have any reactions to that.
I 100% agree. I think if we want to be like very reductionist about how you set culture inside of a company, it's what do you reward, what do you tolerate, and what do you not tolerate? And so to use this as an example, like inaction, we wouldn't tolerate. At bats, we're like, hey, that's good. And then what we reward is like actual successful attempts. And so you could sort of set up a pretty simple system there for how to enable managers to go manage against that.
A follow-on on the culture stuff is you have a pretty remote organization. You did this weight test. I didn't you, where you were kind of like trying to see how many people could recognize it was you or AI?
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously AI has like, a lot of use of AI has this tension between kind of like close-knit culture and organization, because you might just talk more to your ChatGPT than your colleague. It has like a little bit of like this dehumanization, if suddenly like your your manager suddenly replies, most of the replies are done with AI. And at the same time, so like you're a 12-year organization, like you've been through like a few cycles of people now, stuff like that. Talk to me a little bit about like, how do you think about AI remote and then culture, and how to kind of like do that? You mentioned that you guys do offsites, which sound like maybe be one answer to that question. Are there other kind of ways that you try to kind of create like a cohering sense of togetherness?
Yeah, I don't know that like AI actually does much for us on this dimension at the moment. Like I think the big way that we bring togetherness and camaraderie is one, the in-person gathering. So we do that for the whole company once a year, and then we have smaller groups that get together periodically. Two, we have things like show and tell and weekly demos and like, all these sorts of things that give people a chance to like, connect and give feedback and learn and share and, cross-pollinate knowledge. We have, a bunch of like off-topic channels at work. So these are all like prefixed with fun. And so there's like fun gardening and fun home ownership and fun whatever, where people can sort of, you know, get to know each other about, shared interests. If there is one around AI, it's like we do have a fun AI channel, and that's where there's a lot of just like sharing cool stuff. It ranges everything from news about AI to like, wow, did you see this demo that someone did internally or externally? That like just creates like a sense of like, just the sense of possible around like what we could be doing around these things. And so all these just like little, I don't know, like cultural rituals or habits, I do think help create a sense of togetherness, a sense of belonging, which is pretty critical if you're, have a distributed team, which, I'd say most of us have at least some part of our company are doing that these days.
When you talk about culture and togetherness and belonging, I don't know if this is the right spectrum, but on the other end of the spectrum, I think about a phenomenon like burnout.
Hmm.
And I think in remote organizations, it's kind of, you're kind of always on, in a way. How do you think about this is, and if you've listened much to our pod, we get existential and practical. This is an existential question. Where should the benefits accrue? The benefits of, if you think about efficiency gains, productivity gains, if you take as a given, a lot of folks are burnt out, it stands to reason. They should actually, individual employees should probably accrue some of the benefits of the productivity gains. At the same time, an organization wants to drive, everything to the bottom line. How do you think about, where do we net out in 5 years from now? Are people actually legitimately working less? Are early stage startups much more profitable? Where do we net out in terms of where benefits accrue?
I, I I know so far capitalism feels pretty undefeated. So,
Hmm.
you know, I think there's this belief in some circles that, oh, margins are just going to go through the roof because we're going to have a lot fewer people and, a lot more is going to get done. But I think the reality is like, as if margins get bigger and bigger and bigger, some competitor is going to see that and say, the old Jeff Bezos quote, like your margin is my opportunity. And they're going to step in and say, hey, we're going to want to go compete for some of that stuff. And, I think that like net, it probably doesn't change that much. Like, I think the types of work that AI can do for us obviously changes a lot of how we operate, how much effort we're putting into work, how many hours we're working, the cultural norms around that. Like, I don't know. I probably would bet it stays pretty similar, would just be my guess. Because I think capitalism just sort of has a way of like evening this stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got
I
the
tend to
last
agree.
question for you. Agents talking to agents.
Mm,
So obviously we've all learned how to use the autonomous agents now, like the OpenAI, your Chat, your Perplexity, whatever. Um, it seems that a lot of people believe that there'll be agents. So you'll have generalized agents and you'll have specialized agents, right? And at one point there'll be kind of this handover. And I know you guys done some work with MCP, which for people who don't know is this one of these protocols that are kind of like being or these languages that are being kind of explored, of like how agents talk to agents, or when one agent can kind of hand over to another resource. When you talk to a venture capitalist and you ask them, when do you start to see like real agent to agent kind of business kind of emerged? They say 6 to 18 months. But when we talk to people that actually do this every day, they're like, we don't even know what language they'll talk yet. Where are you on the whole spectrum of like agent to agent communication, how fast it will move, when we'll start to see stuff, what might be the first kind of use cases in that kind of like whole universe?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can do agent to agent communication today. The problem that we see in practice is the reliability is really poor for any reasonably complex task. And I think the reason why is that you start to just chain along, if a complex task has like 5 steps or 10 steps, and every step is an agent handing off to another agent,
There's a
and the
probability
reliability
weighting
is
there. Yeah.
yeah, it's like if the reliability is 90%, like, well, by the time you get to the end of that, like it's way off in left field, and you're like, this is just not, it's just not good. And so like that's the real challenge that I think we're facing. And I think what my sense is that the way in which we're going to get these much better is by having agents that are like, you basically have to find a way to like scope the agent down to like a narrow enough set of tasks, like narrow enough task to increase the reliability such that you can get closer to or like an error rate that is tolerable for the organization's risk. And so that takes away some of the magic at the end of the day, where it's like, well, if we're really narrowing the agent down to be so tiny, like why aren't we not just writing like deterministic code here? Like we ought to just be stamping out like this very practical thing. And so, there's something in and around that like we're gonna have to go solve to get this a lot stronger, to make these agents stamp these out. But I think the end result is like we're gonna see like a universe of agents that are very good at like very narrow sets of things.
Wade, I have one last question, if you're willing. A number of our audience members, we kind of float, hey, upcoming guests, and say, if you've got suggestions for questions, let us know. One of the words from your memos that have come up a few times in audience questions is this idea of duplication. You mention in your memo, there's going to be duplication of effort, we're going to have duplication of experiments, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk for a second about, as like an innovation junkie, I'm a huge believer in parallel experimentation, so I get it, but talk for a second about how do you manage duplicate efforts, and how do you organize knowing that duplication of effort is going to be a part of this process?
At the beginning of this, you mostly don't manage it. You mostly are just managing the like psychology of the team. Like it feels so wasteful to so many people internally that there would be multiple efforts. Why aren't we collaborating on this? Why are you doing this? Why, like, I'm doing this. Why are you doing this? Like, my thing should be the one to do it. It's like, that's the thing that is really painful for organizations. And so mostly you're just trying to let people know it's okay. It's okay.
Well,
It's
how do you
okay.
manage those? When somebody says, why are we doing this? What do you say? How do
I
you
mostly
manage their
just say, it's
psychology?
okay. It's okay. Like at some point in time, we're gonna actually have a better sense of like, what is the path forward? And these things will consolidate. They will sort of come into one. But for right now, we actually don't want to get on that off ramp. Like we don't want to pour concrete around this a particular solution because we don't know yet that this is the ideal one. And you see this like with some of the early AI products out there. If you go use them, you can actually see where they took an off ramp and like their
Hmm.
entire architecture of how the product works is kind of backwards now. Like I
Yeah.
can think of a very popular product that we use internally where their agent architecture is just wrong. Like it's just wrong. And like I kind of get it. They were fast to market. They pushed the thing out. If I was in their shoes, like might have made the exact same choice. But the reality is like they're gonna have to go rebuild all that now to take advantage of the way these tools work at this point in time. And so there's just a sense of just like letting people off the hook for like what they feel is like a failure. That there would be so much disorganization that there would be like 1,000 flowers blooming, and saying like
Or
we're okay.
burning may be the better
Yeah, it could be burning
analogy.
too. It
But
could
that's,
be.
I mean, what I'm hearing is you have conviction, as an innovator that some duplication of effort and parallel experimentation is absolutely necessary. And I think that's actually, it's important to state that because I think that there's a number of people that don't know, kind of call it the prior probabilities around innovation, that don't know how it works. And if you think about managing it like you're managing routine work, where
Yeah.
it's deterministic, where where you commission a single experiment to do a single thing. I mean, one of my favorite examples is Steve Jobs parallel commissioning experiments around what would become the iPhone.
Yep.
Tony Fadell, I don't know, most folks may not know this, but just for listeners who are kind of innovation history nerds like me, you go, okay, Tony Fadell was commissioned to make a click wheel version of the iPhone because they didn't know at the time whether multi-touch would work. And so there were multiple teams in Apple building different iPhones, right? People think there's an iPhone team, right? That one team with one approach. It's all that say, what I'm hearing you say, Wade, is you as a founder and CEO know that duplication of effort is necessary to identify the best path forward. Therefore, your job is to manage the psychology of individuals who don't know that.
Mhm.
The first order thing for a leader who's listening to this show is you have to know as a leader, duplication of effort is required. Then the question becomes, how do I manage people's psychology who feel like this is wasted effort, et cetera, et cetera?
Totally. Totally. And then at some point in time, you probably are going to have to deal with the inverse pain, which is now everyone's trained on this one way of working. And now it's like, oh, we actually have some answers. We do need to make some conviction bets. And we have to figure out a way to like bring these approaches together and be a thing. And that's a different moment in time. And it requires you to shift gears again. And so you talked about change management earlier. And it's like, God, it's like such a, once your organization gets to a certain size and scale, like a lot of that is the name of the game.
Anything you want to say to tip your hat to anything regarding the future?
We've got, we'll be announcing Zap Connect is opening up for registration here soon this week. And folks it happens in the fall. And if you want to see what a lot of the stuff we've got cooking around AI is coming, I would say come to that because we'll have some fun stuff dropping.
That's super cool.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Really, really, really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. Yeah, and thanks for making the product. I'm a super user of it. So yeah, really appreciate it.
I love it. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Wade. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so Henrik, as a super fan of the product, what stood out to you as a customer of Zapier?
What the thing actually that mostly started with me is that he started his company around the same time as I started Bark and similar type size. And so it's always nice to just hear somebody kind of be at the same point in their organizational path or journey. I think, a few things, let's start there, for example. I'm always impressed by people like Wade that we have on that is just pushing all this AI usage through the organization. And what stands out is that he says that he's a 2 out of a 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think obviously, objectively, if you compare him to any other organization, he's probably a 9 out of a 10. But
Right.
I think people like him believe that there's so much opportunity for not just making it more efficient and like reducing staff, but also just making the organization more resourceful and do more of this thing that he thinks that the organization deserves to do. And so I think the one thing is that kind of a permutation of that is something you said, which is just inaction is permissible in a lot of organizations. And I think a lot of founders, as you can hear on him, is just tired of that. And I don't think that that is going to stand for the next 5 years. I think leaders are just going to go, hey, if you don't even experiment about this, it's going to be really tough for you to have a long-term career. And I think that's just a universal kind of statement that people who basically still want to print their emails, don't be Fred, or whatever it is that.
Right. Don't be Fred. Yeah. Yeah.
Then I think if you don't already take all the feedback from your customers and put it into a place where an agent can access it so that that data is available throughout the organization, that just seemed to be kind of like an absolutely no-brainer for any organization at any size. Have all feedback loops from the organization in a place where agents chat bots, and thus the organization at large can get hold of it. And I think it was just a friendly reminder from him that they're doing it in secret, benefits from it, and everybody else should do the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, it's something that's basic, and I was kind of thinking about asking you about it because you're such a master of that. I do think that a lot of people listen to this podcast and who use AI a lot just can't get their head around why people are not using it more, because it seems so useful when you start to use it. And I think it's just very conceptual how you do a lot of these things. And so just having very concrete example, I saw a LinkedIn post you posted the other day where you were talking about something that somebody from the Forest Service was doing, some of that. And so you seem to have all these forums where people are just showcases kind of like endless amount of like use cases. And you go to Wade's kind of LinkedIn, and he had this kind of graph also with like a lot of, he used it for onboarding, he used it for offboarding, he used it for these, just like 20 use cases. And so I one takeaway is just like the simplicity of just constantly finding more avenues to show endless amount of use cases, so that people who are not using as much can go like, hey, wait a minute, can you use it for that? And then go out and do it.
Yeah. I really resonate with your comments about practicality and his comments around there's very little kind of simple, approachable how-to. I think he said the refrain of hype is at a volume level 11. And I think similar to that hype, there's a distribution, hype on the positive end, doom on the other end. There's a ton of hype and doom, but there's not a lot of kind of humble, here's something really cool, here's something really fun. And I think what differentiates Wade from many folks that I'm observing online is he's just being super helpful and super practical. We should link to several of the resources that he's provided in the show notes, because he's got a great, play-by-play breakdown of his hackathon week. He's got a great breakdown of the code red that they announced a year ago now. And I think he said 2 years, by the way, since code red, but I think it's only 1 year, right? I'm pretty sure. GPT-4 last year.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Yes.
GPT-4 had to be last year. I'm pretty sure it's March of 2023. And if they declared a code red, so he said 2 years, but I think it's 1 year. My thought is he's a year ahead of where most folks are, a year.
March 23.
Yeah. Oh, 23. Okay. 2 years. There you go. Yeah, he was right. So March 23 is when GPT-4 came out. They announced their code red April of 2023, had their first AI hackathon April of 2023. We're filming July of 2025. I think most folks who are listening have yet to declare a code red, perhaps because they've never thought of it, or perhaps they don't feel it's necessary yet. But you can kind of just start the clock from when do you declare this is so foundational and fundamental and important that we need to actually stop the gears, have folks spend a week experimenting, exploring, building. And then there's so much resources that he's provided. It doesn't have to be confusing. It doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, you could literally hit rinse, repeat on a lot of his playbook, which he's graciously put out there.
One thing to add on that is that he said two things, and I think you brought one of them up, which is basically, when do you tell the team that this is a big deal, right? And using the code with us, the kind of like the moment. But I think what he then also says is like a lot of people felt internally that was a bit alarmist, right? And I think a lot of people who don't call a code red or something similar is probably like feeling the same pushback from the organization. They're like, yeah, like email, like AI, whatever.
Right.
The second thing that I think is fascinating is like this idea of a hold anxiety, his staff's anxiety on his shoulders. Like, we will have many people try to do the same thing, and that is fine. We will have many of these projects that we will try, and we accept a 90% kind of like success rate, like even per chat. That is like something that a lot of organizations probably wouldn't do because, like, hey, what do you say? Like the product only works 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's probably also like, I think a leadership kind of component of it, which is like, hey, if I'm going to utilize AI and get all the benefits out of AI, I also am going to allow my team to kind of pass on some of this anxiety that they might have onto me as a leader, because I'm willing to be a little bit alarmist. I'm willing to accept that I'm wasting resources having many people do one thing and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, he actually says quite eloquently in his post, we have determined that standing still is the only sure to fail approach. And so I think maybe a simple way to put this is there's a binary decision before you. Do nothing or duplicate effort. Which will you choose to do? And I think for too many organizations, the perception of the pain of duplicating effort is leading them to the wrong conclusion, which is, therefore, let's do nothing because we don't know what to do. And the truth is, as with any other innovation, the only way you discover what's worth doing is by commissioning experiments, by duplicating effort in some areas in order to overcome that kind of inertia of the unknown. So Wade's a great example. This is super
You're
fun.
probably a student of this, because I would imagine this is not an AI thing, that's an innovation thing in general, right? Like,
Totally, 100%.
and so what is the prevailing kind of wisdom or thesis of why organizations, I guess there's written many books like The Innovator's Dilemma and a lot of these different books on it. But if you were to kind of like just answer a leader's question now saying, hey, I don't understand why it's so difficult to get my organization to kind of like go from a 0 to a 5, like in this journey, where would you point them?
I tell them to look in the mirror.
Say more.
You and I have had the privilege of speaking with so many amazing leaders who are so outspoken about their own experiments and their own behavior. Think about Brad Anderson sharing his screen before all hands meetings. You think about Diara Bousseau sending Loom videos to her team. You think about Kevin Kelly's daily Suno practice, right? On and on and on, right? A leader who's saying, I'm trying to tell other people to ... is missing the point, right? Starting with yourself, Greg Shove's third screen, right? And on and on and on. The leaders whose organizations are transforming are leaders who have transformed themselves.
Amen. It's a good piece of advice, Professor.
Well, I hope people won't log off because of the moment of silence that it took me to actually think of the answer. Because sometimes the old gray matter can't respond as quickly as GPT can.
One of the most impressive degree shows I've ever been to was St. Martin's Lane in London, where they have this kind of interactive degree show. And this student had made this kind of piece where she had recorded every time on any TV channel within a 24-hour kind of cycle where there was silence. And her thesis was that silence in today's world is when something really powerful is about to happen or has just happened. It's just after the car accident. It's just when somebody said something outrageous. It's just when something crazy is about to happen. And so I was kind of drilling in that moment of like, oh, what's going to come? And delivered, sir.
Well, let's leave it to the listeners. Maybe the secret code word should be either silence delivered or silence did not deliver. That's the code word. You get to choose.
Let's do that.
If you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to like, subscribe, share with a friend, perhaps share with a leader who needs to hear the message after the moment of silence.
Thank you.